Bien, buenas tardes, queridos estudiantes. El día de hoy tenemos nuestra sesión número 4 de la asignatura de métodos cualitativos. Tenemos el gusto, el honor de contar el día de hoy con Magdalena Madany-Saa. Magdalena es una amiga, colega, que hemos tenido la oportunidad de compartir en varios espacios y pensamientos, sobre todo en cuanto al lenguaje, a la importancia del lenguaje y a la importancia también de pensarlo desde las lenguas de los pueblos originarios, ¿no? Así que brevemente deben haber revisado también el perfil, pero les voy a contar un poquito acerca de Magdalena. Magdalena tiene un bachelor, ¿no? Un grado en filología española, ¿sí? Por la Universidad de Warsaw, en Polonia, un máster en estudios latinoamericanos de la Universidad Andina Simon Bolivar, y también es candidata a doctora en la Universidad de Pensilvania, la Universidad Estatal de Pensilvania, ¿sí? Magdalena ha sido profesora de inglés durante profesora del idioma inglés y de profesores del idioma inglés durante más de 25 años. Ha trabajado en el Ecuador también entre 2004 y 2016. Y actualmente pues está haciendo su investigación en la Universidad, como les decía, Estatal de Pensilvania, y trabaja temas relacionados con política de lenguaje, translingüismo, pedagogía decolonial, ¿sí? Y dentro de sus idiomas pues está el polaco, el español y el inglés. Y esta charla pues me imagino que va a ser una mezcla ahí translingüista, ¿no? De entre español, inglés y todo lo demás. Pero los chicos están preparados, ¿eh? Tenían que presentar su suficiencia de inglés para la maestría, así que puedes ponerlos a prueba tranquilamente, Magdalena. No hay problema. Te doy la palabra y muchísimas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros el día de hoy.
Thank you, Javier, for this lovely introduction. So today I'm going to walk you through 4 contemporary ethnographic research methods, which are, of course, qualitative methods. In my department, which is Department of Education in the Pennsylvania State University, we mainly use qualitative methods. There are some educators in my department, especially in psychology, education, who do use quantitative ones, but I do not belong to this group. And on the contrary, I was very lucky to have professors in my university who are well-known ethnographers, and they do very important ethnographic work in education, in adult education, in anthropology, linguistic anthropology. So I was able to learn from them and to apply my research. So I would like to tell you about the research that I read about, but also the research I have done. Okay, so how we are going to work today is that first we are going to have this recorded session for about 1 hour. And then we will have work in groups. And I have some activities for you to think and reflect, and of course, to answer your questions. Okay, so let's start. So first of all, you can see the sign, right? What does it say on the sign? Culture, yeah, exactly. So I chose this word because we call it in our university area of focus. So we all choose our kind of like especialización, right? So it's called area of focus in my studies, and in my case is language, culture, and society, right? So this is my focus of studies, and therefore ethnographic studies are very close to my way of looking at different educational phenomena that I'm interested in. So first of all, since we are going to talk about ethnographic methods, let's define what ethnography is. And I underlined the keywords, the important words. So one of those underlined words is social relations. right? So those are the relations that are happening between people in a society. So a way to learn about those relations is to conduct ethnographic studies. And it is a qualitative method which can dive into, right, which can explore the diversity of cultures, the interculturality, if you prefer this way. Another important premise of ethnographic studies is that it's on the scene learning. So we happen to be in a place with people living and watching, right, those social relations. Now during the pandemic, it's a little bit limited, right? So now very often what we have is Zoom. This is how I'm conducting right now part of my research. So we have to somehow, ethnographers, we have to see what's available right now. But as soon as we can travel again and be with people, right, and observe and build those social relations with participants, with the places, this is what ethnographers do. Ethnographers work in a place and they get to know the place through the people, through the social relations. And as for the etymology of the word, it is a combination ethnography. It's the writing about the culture, right? So how can we describe the culture of the people? So for some of you who are going to be more related to science and technology, you will need to, when along my presentation, please keep thinking about your profession and how can you build social relations in different places so that you can answer questions that maybe you haven't even thought about before. So today I'm going to talk about 4 different ethnographic methods. The first one is called mapping. The second one, walking, then interviewing, and finally, autoethnography. So those are the methods. After each one, I will stop and I will ask you if you have any questions or if you would like to have maybe some translingual part in which I can explain it in Spanish. So far, so good. As for the language, would you like me to use more Spanish or is it okay?
It's okay.
I don't see you. Maybe I will just stop sharing for a second. Maybe you could, let me see, view gallery. Okay, can you use maybe some emojis if it's okay, English so far? Yeah, okay. All right, good. Okay, wonderful. Okay, great. Pablo, you wanted to share something?
Sorry, it's a mistake.
Ah, okay. All right, so let's do the mapping first. So I'm very excited about the mapping because this is a very art-based ethnographic method. And first I have to tell you, when I read about this method, I felt that my kind of technological skills were not good enough to do what I was reading about. So I thought, okay, I cannot really replicate exactly what I see in this article, but I can adapt it. So I will show you how the researchers in this particular project that Kim Powell explained in her article from 2010. But then I will show you how I adapted it to my research, but also to my, honestly, computer skills and technological skills, right? So we have to think about it, that what you see, what you read about, when you read about qualitative methods or ethnographic methods, think how you can adapt it, not necessarily how you will replicate it, because remember, they are based on who we are, but also where we are, right? So let me tell you first what Kim Powell, what she did in this research from 2010. At the end, I will share with you all the bibliography, okay? So she went with her students to Panama, El Chorrillo, and she asked among all the students, 4 students, to engage in visual kind of ethnographic methods. So very art-based, very visual, okay? So she encouraged those students to use photography, to use mapping, to use sketching. Sketching is, I don't know if this word is known, it's like kind of like drawing, just like tracing, right? And other artistic forms, for example, such as collage. So those students, they were using those visual methods alongside the field notes, which is a very typical ethnographic method. So you observe and then you take notes about your observation. This is what field note is about. And then interviews, which is with the people from Panama, from El Chorrillo, where this study happened. So in this case, I want to just show you what they did in terms mainly of mapping. Because I really liked it. I thought it was a very rich ethnographic method of engaging with the place and with the people. So Kim Powell, who is a very well-known contemporary ethnographer, and she happened to be my professor. She says that when you are using mapping, you have to remember that this is about kind of like combining the experiences of a place where you are. So whenever you're going to do your research, remember that it's very important where you are. Every place will invite you to maybe use different tools. And your embodied experience. So the experience of you walking, talking, right, observing. So this is a bodily experience, right, as ethnographers. In other words, an ethnographer is not going to send information and then receive it back completed like a form or like a survey. That's not how it works. So ethnographer will go, will travel, will be with people, will be in the place, and will have this embodied experience. And finally, she said that mapping is observing the ways in which people construct meaning of space and place through personal experience and everyday activity, the lived experience. So you would be focusing on what people actually are doing every day. So it doesn't have to be a special occasion. On the contrary, you want to see what is happening, for example, in a city, how people live. So you just go and observe, take photos, draw maps, etc. So let me now show you each of those 4 students, how they approached this task, this research in Panama. So first of all, I think it's important, as I told you before, every time when we are doing an ethnographic study, it's important to know exactly where you are. If you are going to do ethnographic study in Quito, in Ibarra, in La Costa, in Colombia, wherever you go, you need to know where you are really. And that's why I was saying it's not about replicating, it's about knowing exactly where we are and knowing the historical background of the place where we are, right? So, for example, they went to El Chorrillo, And it's also important to remember that all those students, they were American. So there is a kind of dark history, right, of Americans invading Panama and influencing the political decisions there. So when you go to do ethnographic study with people, you have to also know where you come from and what happened between, for example, the country that you are representing and the country where you are going. So in terms of El Chorrillo, if you read about it, it's a kind of complicated place in terms of the social inequality that is happening there. So as it says here, historically, El Chorrillo is comprised mainly of poor residents, many of whom exist on social and charitable welfare, and many of whom are immigrants from rural areas of Panama or other Central and South American countries. There has remained a large population also of African and West Indian residents. Many of the wooden houses originally built for canal workers have not held up well in the tropical weather due to wood rot and termites, and are thus vulnerable to infestations and fire. So the living conditions are not the best, right, from what we can understand. The Chorrillo neighborhood also consists of low-income housing projects, such as the Barraza, a series of high-density, high-rise building. So, you know, like building next to each other, right, and high, so that many people can live there. And there are, unfortunately, there's also violence. There are rival gangs operating there, right? So this is like a very brief description, but as an ethnographer, when you go, you really want to learn about the city, because this, what I did, you just read it on internet. This comes from internet. This doesn't come from study. So when you study, when you do ethnographic research, you learn the city through the social relations. Let's remember, it's about social relations. It's about being there with people. It's not about reading what Wikipedia says about the place, okay? That's the embodied experience when you are going to be there. So this is, for example, this is one of the photos that I found on internet. So in a moment, I will show you the work that has been done by those students, and none of them has used like photos like this from internet. So they were doing their own pictures, right? Their own photographs in a very deliberate and planned way to learn about the city, not to accumulate photos taken by someone, but to be there and to learn about the city and about the social issues, housing issues, whatever issues they wanted to investigate. So this is the first student who used something that is called Juxtaposed Maps. And this is a very interesting way of working and learning about a city. So this student asked different participants to draw something that is called a cognitive map. So a cognitive map is not a map that you will find on internet, or I don't know if you remember the maps that we had before, like the paper maps. So those are geographical maps. The cognitive map is the map that actually you use like in your brain when you live in a place, so that you can orient yourself. You know where your house is, you know where your school is, you know where your favorite bar is, you know where your best friend lives, right? So you know the places that are relevant to you. Maybe you don't know all the places because you don't go to those places, right? So when you do your own cognitive map, you actually learn what is important for those people. So this student asked several participants to draw their cognitive maps. And then that's the tech savvy part, which I don't know what application the student used, but the student was able digitally to juxtapose, right, those cognitive maps on a real map. So the student was able to see what buildings, what places were relevant for the participants in El Chorrillo. So finally, what this student did was combine all those maps and come up with the places that were just important for those people. So this is how they learned where people spend their time, what is relevant for them and what is not, how they see the spaces, how they see the relations, why they chose those places. Because remember that they've been complementing those mapping or sketching or photographs with field notes and with interviews, right? So for example, here you can see that for some people, it was important to draw that distance with the bahia, right? With the sea. For some others, it was the high buildings, La Barraza, remember, right? The high density houses, the park, etc. So that was like this personalized cognitive collective map of the people who lived there. So this is what student number 1 did to learn about the cognitive mapping of the residents. Another student, in this case, student number 2, decided to work on the waterfront. So this student wanted to learn what the waterfront, the beach, right, the closeness to the sea meant culturally for the people. So this student used the visual summary of different photos. So this student actually went and took photos of all different places at the waterfront. And then this student did a very interesting thing. So while having all those different photos from the waterfront, he organized them in a relational way. So the student, through, again, observations and also interviews, was able to draw connections between different photos and find out what they meant culturally for the people. So for example, some photos were categorized as waste dumping, right? Sí, ensucian bastante la costa, como pueden ver. Es donde botan la basura también. Pero también la utilizan para la pesca, ¿verdad? Para sobrevivir, para su economía. So the economic use. For travel, of course, it's a transportation way as well. It's also for pleasure, right? So they were for community meetings. So there were different ways of how the waterfront was used by the residents. So that was another kind of research, very visual, art-based, as you can see. Okay, student number 3 did something else. Student number 3 did a photo collage. So you can see here that this student went to a specific neighborhood, like let's say like una cuadra, okay? Y tomó fotos de una cuadra. So you can see photo number 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then place those photos on a map, right, of this real neighborhood. But those photos, what is interesting is that this student put numbers on all those photos and then complemented each number with a field note. So for example, in case of number 2, I will show you the field note from place number 2. So the student did observation. So took a photo, then put the photo on the kind of in order of this neighborhood, but accompanied like a narration, right? What this researcher or student was able to observe. So for example, you can see, I mean, this is not a very beautiful picture because it's not about photographing beautiful pictures, it's about photographing whatever you have at hand. This is where you are. But this person, this researcher, was trying really to find as much as possible about this place and to observe. So this person said, okay, this is a reminder of the past. Maybe this place was bombarded during the US invasion. Before, maybe this place was maintained, but now it's not. And you can actually see, this person said, even like leftovers from bombing, right? So this place suffered, right? It's a historical place. If you look at it, I mean, it looks awful at the first sight, but then when you learn the history and you really look carefully, you learn from this place quite a lot. So maybe now it's used as a trash bin, maybe just people, you know, placed waste there, but it was not always used in that way, right? So it might be also this person, this researcher learned that it used to be a place where vendors were selling their products. So it's really, there was a lot of history about this this place. So and let's see now what student number 4 did in terms of mapping. So student number 4 actually used different skills, rather sketching a little bit more than mapping, but still use a map as a framing. So you can see that like here in the middle, this student used still a map of the city, but accompanied this map, like the big map, with drawings. So as you can see, like this student was, I guess, very talented artistically, and drew different musical events that were happening in El Chorrillo. So then, of course, this researcher also described what was happening in each place, but more than describing, this person drew it. So it's, I mean, I think it's amazing. If you have this kind of skills, that would be awesome. I don't have those drawing skills, but I think that, or sketching skills, but I think it's beautiful what this researcher did in terms of really showing the lived experience, right? So this person went there, look at those artists, sketch them, interview people who are there in those events, and then put them on the map. So this person showed a very different face of El Chorrillo, right? Still using the map as the framing for this method. So this is called narrative collage of, in this case, of music. So we can have a narrative collage as well. Okay, so next step, I will show you my how I adapted those mapping methods. But before that, I wanted to ask you if you have questions so far, or if you want to add something, comments.
Yo tengo una pregunta. ¿Te puedo hacer en español?
Por supuesto. Vanessa, sí.
Bueno, lo que nos explicas, todos tienen esta... Quiero entender cómo el investigador, él plantea las relaciones que él observó, estas relaciones sociales que él observó, o también les preguntan a las personas de esta sociedad, de este grupo que está estudiando.
Muchas gracias, Vanessa, por tu pregunta. La verdad es que en los estudios etnográficos, muchas veces estamos combinando lo que se llama también triangulación, ¿verdad? Diferentes métodos. Así que no solamente estamos basándonos en un solo método, pero tratamos de combinarlos. En este caso, sí, estos estudiantes, aparte de utilizar mapping, lo estaban complementando con interviewing y también con observation. Entonces, todo esto fue juntos. Por eso el resultado final fue tan rico, ¿no? O sea, fue una data collection de mucha calidad. Muchas gracias por tu pregunta. Veo dos manitos levantadas, adelante. No puedo ver sus nombres, discúlpenme.
Sí, puede ser Vladi y luego Tamara también, que en ese orden me parece que fue.
Thank you. Magdalena, I have a question about what is better for an ethnography study, to be observer or to be involved? Because I was reading about that, and some people said that it's better for some special studies to be involved. It means to live in the I don't know, in the town, in the country, I don't know. And other people said that it's better to be an observer. Yeah. What is the difference, and what's your opinion about it? I would like to know that.
Well, this is a really great question, Vladimir. I think it depends on, actually on many factors. It depends, of course, number one, on the phenomenon that you are studying as an ethnographer, right? So, for example, I did a study, an ethnographic study with my own family, and I actually had the same question to my professor. I asked, okay, I'm doing this ethnographic observations on how my family, because my family is very multilingual. So I was recording the games that we were playing to see what languages, especially the children, but not only the children, but what languages the family was using, right? So like we call the family lect. And of course that my professor said, you are part of this family. So of course you cannot only be the observer, be there. So that's why we have this role of a observer participant, right? So you participate in your observation, but sometimes it's not the best way. So for example, there are many ethnographic studies of researchers going to schools to observe classes, right? With children or with adolescents. And it might be disturbing for the professor or for the children if you start to participate. So very often they just kind of, sit at the back and just observe. So it depends on the phenomenon. So I would say, Vladimir, that there is no like better or superior way. It depends on in which place you are, your membership in the community as well. I think this is really important. So that you can wisely choose if you are going to be just observing or maybe being a participant and understand from a different angle the same situation. Especially if you belong to the community or like in my case to the family, I'm not going to pretend I'm just observing my own kids, right? I'm going to play with them as well. So in ethnographic studies, it's really important for you to, as a researcher, to state your positionality, who you are, and what is your membership in this community that you are studying. So I think that many decisions will be based on that, like what is your relationship also with the place or with the community.
Thank you.
Tamara, por favor.
Thank you, Magdalena. I have two questions. The first one is, how would they choose to use a method like musical narrative and not something like, I don't know, mural art or graffitis or something like that? And the second one is, in the case of the collage method, why they choose a specific area or a specific point in El Chorrillo and not any other places?
Those are really great questions. Vanessa, your name disappeared again.
Tamara.
My name is Tamara.
Tamara, sorry, Tamara. So Tamara, sometimes in ethnographic studies, it's really better, and this is what we are also kind of like trained to be as specific as we can, because it's very easy to lose focus when you are doing, like I'm going to do ethnographic studies in Quito. Like Quito is huge. So I've been doing ethnographic studies with my actually US students in Cuenca. And it's interesting that you're asking about graffitis, because what we were looking at signs, street signs. Okay, so we were doing kind of linguistic studies. So we were taking pictures of different signs, might be restaurant names, or, you know, like anuncios pegados en un poste. But I was very specific that I just didn't want them to do it in Cuenca, because Cuenca is huge. So I said, okay, you can choose, for example, to do the study specifically in the area where you know that many expats from US live, okay? Or you can do it, for example, in the area where you have like all those wonderful restaurants for tourists along the river, right? So, or you can do the same study just on the university campus, so that you go in depth and you take like all the pictures, because it's also, you know, it also depends how much time you have, right? But I wouldn't say that the whole Cuenca is the best way. So you need to have criteria. So you can discuss it with your co-researchers or with your advisor, what criteria you're going to choose to narrow your study, because when it's so broad, you'd really lose very easily the focus. So for example, I thought that was a really good idea, that this person, not geographically, the student number 4 focus, but focus on what kind of events I'm going to look at. So I'm going only to look at musical events, but in the whole city, in the whole neighborhood of Chorrillo, right? Some others, they said, I want to look at all different buildings. It doesn't matter if it's just a corner, someone's house, a store, but only on this street. Okay, so you have to choose the criteria that will decide which part or which activities you are going to focus on. So that brings really the richness. So you can, because ethnography is also about a very rich description, not, you know, kind of superficial about the whole city. No, like you really go in depth.
Thank you.
We have some more. Thank you. Thank you for your
Fernando, por favor, también tiene una pregunta.
Magdalena, muchas gracias. Dentro de este proceso, bueno, de lo que es la etnografía que tú explicaste, el tema de explorar culturas diferentes, verdaderas relaciones sociales en diferentes lugares, ¿no? Y justamente cuando ya se empezó a hablar de los Ethnographic Research Methods, me llamó la atención justamente el tema del mapeo. Con respecto al tema de mapeo, ¿ustedes hacen uso de alguna herramienta de información geográfica? Por ejemplo, ArcView, ArcMap, lo que usan generalmente los técnicos geógrafos, ¿no? Que no son métodos muy simples, ¿no? Pero sí tienen un uso muy importante, porque son herramientas súper fuertes en el desarrollo de proyectos y también me imagino en el caso de las investigaciones, ¿sí? Con estas herramientas tú puedes hacer modelaciones matemáticas, puedes hacer multivariables de procesos y todo eso. Entonces, me parecen herramientas sumamente fuertes dentro de este proceso de este método etnográfico que tú mencionaste. Entonces, más o menos, ¿podrías explicarme cuál es la metodología que en la que ustedes se basan justamente para este proceso?
Muchas gracias. Es una pregunta que ya de hecho la he tenido antes, pero te voy a ser sincera porque como este proyecto fue realizado por estudiantes que estaban en el departamento de arquitectura y ellos usaron métodos que utilizan también estudiantes en el departamento de artes. Entonces yo, o sea, en esta clase que yo tomé hubo realmente, como ustedes también veo que tienen mucho interés en transdisciplinaridad, ¿no? O sea, no solamente enfocarme en mi disciplina, digámoslo así, pero también ver qué hacen otros colegas en otras disciplinas. Yo de verdad en College of Education, nosotros no utilizamos, o por lo menos yo no utilizo, quizás no voy a hablar en nombre de todos, pero yo no utilizo mucho los art tools relacionados, por ejemplo, con los estudios geográficos. Sí tengo Dentro de mis notas, sí tengo algunas referencias que puedo compartir con Javi y él después puede compartirles con ustedes, pero yo personalmente no los he utilizado, pero sí sé que las personas más que nada en el departamento de artes han hecho cosas increíbles. Ya vas a ver cómo yo lo adapté, vas a ver, o sea, la simplicidad de mis métodos, pero manteniendo el mismo principio metodológico, pero haciéndolo tal como a mí me sirve en mis estudios en este caso fue de multilingüismo. Pero sí, hay personas que, tal como dices, utilizan herramientas Google Earth, etcétera, para darles totalmente otro toque, que yo no tengo esta experiencia. Tengo algunas referencias que puedo dar, pero no los he utilizado. Pero me parece genial si tú quieres como que un poco explorar este tema, porque de verdad este tipo de estudios se ve para mí fenomenal, pero no he explorado estos temas en la educación.
Muchas gracias, Magdalena.
Gracias. Pablo, por favor.
Gracias, Magdalena. Disculpa que le haga en español la pregunta. Me llama mucho la atención el tema de que, ya sea como observador o como participante, tienes de alguna manera que integrarte en una comunidad, en un entorno social del cual, digamos, en el ejemplo que nos diste, posiblemente era notorio que el investigador no pertenecía a ese entorno. ¿Hay alguna estrategia o algún tipo de enfoque para que tú puedas primero poder estar ahí? Me refiero a que tu presencia no genera algún tipo, por decirlo así, de sospecha, de reacción negativa. Y después, obviamente, ya como estrategia, el poder estar inmersivo, si queremos llamarlo así, en el sitio este, ¿no? ¿Cuál de la experiencia que tú tienes, qué consejos podría haber sobre eso? ¿Qué estrategias podría haber para eso, no? Muchas gracias.
No, sí me parece muy importante tu pregunta y eso se refiere no solamente al mapping, eso se va a referir a todos los otros métodos de los cuales voy a hablar, porque walking, cuando tú estás haciendo walking ethnography, si tú escoges a una persona, no va a ser un completo extraño, porque si yo pido a alguien, ¿sabes que yo quiero caminar contigo en el bosque? No sé, es como que es hasta peligroso si alguien me pide a mí, me acompañas en el bosque porque quiero hacer walking ethnography. Entonces sí, conocer a la gente para hacer entrevistas, para hacer observaciones, inclusive observaciones en las cuales tú eres nada más observer, no participas, pero para que tu presencia, como tú dices, no sea obnoxious, es muy importante construir las relaciones. Y esto es, por eso también los métodos qualitative methods toman mucho tiempo porque se basan mucho en las relaciones. Yo estoy haciendo, a pesar de que yo estoy estudiando y vivo en los Estados Unidos, yo estoy haciendo mi investigación en Ecuador, porque ahí es mi comunidad, ahí están los profesores de inglés con los cuales yo tengo relaciones, que me conocen muchísimos años. Entonces, obviamente, si yo quiero entrevistarlos, observar sus clases, ir a sus reuniones, es totalmente otro tipo de relación y también tenemos que acordarnos que ellos tienen todo el derecho de no darme el consentimiento para participar en eso. Entonces, si yo no construyo este tipo de relaciones, es muy probable que me digan que no, ¿verdad? Entonces, por ahí empieza todo. Entonces, sí, definitivamente para eso es en este tiempo. Muchas veces los estudios etnográficos en sí son de años, de meses, por lo menos de meses. Entonces, si tú vas a un sitio nuevo, cuando tú empiezas tu relación, vas muy de poquito, ¿sí? Primero haces entrevistas. De hecho, no vas primero a hacer una observación porque puedes ser considerado como un invasor por poco, ¿sí? Sino pasas tiempo, puedes caminar con la persona, conversar, más hacer quizás entrevistas no formales, no estructuradas. Después puedes tener entrevistas, ya vamos a hablar de este tipo de preguntas que son preguntas muy abiertas para conocer a la gente, tú también para que te des a conocer quién eres y ahí empiezas poco a poco relacionarte, ¿no? Eso es una base realmente para los estudios etnográficos. este tiempo que uno de alguna manera invierte en darse a conocer, de tener el gusto de conocer a la comunidad, al grupo, a la población con la cual tú quieres trabajar es muy importante. Muchas personas también aprenden el idioma, ¿no? Porque no quieren utilizar el idioma, por ejemplo, el idioma inglés, que sí tiene también su problemática hegemónica, ¿verdad? Si yo voy a hacer un estudio, por ejemplo, en Ecuador, y voy a forzar a mis participantes a necesariamente hablar inglés. En pueblos indígenas, de eso también estábamos hablando con el profesor de ustedes, con Javier, porque los dos teníamos, sin saber, teníamos la misma idea de aprender quichua para poder también conversar con nuestros participantes en el idioma de ellos. Entonces sí requiere una actitud, ¿verdad? Etnográfica y conocer cómo construir estas relaciones para tener de verdad una experiencia plena cuando estás ya colectando o generando data.
Muchas gracias.
Y esta primera ronda con Alejandro terminamos, por favor. De ella continúa.
Hello, Magdalena. It's my pleasure. I just have one quick question. It's just about this context of pandemics around the globe. If I could like to make or to apply a kind of qualitative study across the nation, what is your recommendation if I want to reach out for a specific niche of people, like if I just want to get through university rectors, something like that? What's your recommendation? How can I reach out through digital tools like Zoom or this kind of platforms? Do you have any kind of experience about this?
Well, you know, actually, this is interesting because this is my own challenge right now, since I'm doing research in Ecuador in 3 different places, because it's a comparative ethnographic study. I'm reaching out to educators and other educational stakeholders in those universities, in those 3 universities. But again, I have to say that it's really important when you are doing ethnographic studies to know the cultural context of the place where you're going to work, right? So you know that here to reach to a rector, right? You need somehow to be introduced by someone. This is very cultural. You need somebody who will say, oh, ella es Magdalena, yo he trabajado con ella, ella es una investigadora de Penn State, me gustaría presentarla. So you build those relationships. So when you don't know the person, we use the technique called the snowball, right? So you ask one person that you know, and then this person can relate you to someone else, and then this person can relate you to someone else until you build those relationships and you get the people. But at least, you need to know, I would say, one person that would be very generous and introduce you to someone else and give you another contact, et cetera, et cetera. So then you can reach this person via Zoom. And of course, being, very aware of maybe internet issues, right, connection, and also even, the simple thing of maybe those people are not very tech savvy, so make it as easy as possible for them, so not to stress them with very complicated interview methods, new platforms that will take preparation. So choose things that will not require time for preparation for those people, right? So that will be very important. So you respect the time that they will give you. But more than that, think about how you will reach this person, knowing the cultural relations in Ecuador. sí, conocer el fulanito que te presenta al Pepito. Y, so that's called the snowballing, right? So this is, I would definitely recommend you this, to start with, just maybe one person and keep constructing your relations, because you cannot just show up in a university because there are no people. I mean, it's still this pandemic. So just use, WhatsApp, Messenger, whatever you are using to, start building those relations until you reach the people that you need to reach.
Thank you. Do you consider that this is a limitation at this point for your study?
They made me redesign my study. So maybe at the end it's going to be better. I don't know, but I had to redesign it and change it methodologically. Yeah. So maybe it's going to be better. Who knows? But
appreciate your sincerely answer. Yeah, that's it.
You're welcome. Okay, sorry, it took lots of time, but I'm very thankful for the questions. Thank you so much for engaging with the presentation. Okay, so let me quickly show you what I did. So I had 3 participants, and what I was doing, I was really interested in their linguistic ideologies and how and linguistic practices, how they were using languages, where they were using languages, etc. So I took a family that is multinational and that lives nearby. So I was able to spend time with them, right? Those were the times before the pandemic. So I was actually with them. I asked them to draw a map. So I didn't give them too much information because I didn't want to limit their imagination. I just said, I want you to draw the map of places in which you speak different languages. Okay. So for example, Lorena, who was the mother of this family, she drew, as you can see, like the whole world, right? And she used like color coding. You can see Español, verde, Portuguese, Italiano, English, different colors. And then what I did, I recorded because she drew, and then I said, as Tamara was asking, right? So I was complimenting, right? So I said, okay, can you describe this map to me? And I recorded it. And then I took like pieces of this recording and I placed them on the map. I don't know if you will be able to hear it.
Está Islandia. Reykjavik. Estuve en Reykjavik hace como 3-4 años.
Were you able to hear it? Okay. So this is, of course, just an example.
Dibujé México, Centroamérica, Sudamérica, la E de español, es Uruguay, muy marcadito. Bueno, Portugal, perdón, Brasil se habla portugués. Nunca he estado en Portugal, pero también lo puse ahí como referencia.
So, for example, when she wrote Portuguese, I didn't know why she wrote Portuguese, but she just used it as a reference. She doesn't speak Portuguese really. So it's interesting, right? Like to learn more of what you can really understand just from the map. So remember that I gave this. I gave the same. Okay, I gave the same instruction to her sons. So her older son, he drew this map and he drew casa, also color-coded, just like his mom. Then Schule in Deutsch. And it's interesting because he wrote each language in its language, right? Italiano, English, Español, Deutsch. So it's kind of interesting. So here's what Antonio said.
Sí, a veces hablo inglés, pero también hablo mucho alemán, hasta con mis amigos. Cuando estamos en otras clases, si tomo alemán con ellos.
So again, I also asked him to describe his map to me. So his map, as you can see, is very different from his mom's map. Okay, and that's the last map. That's the map of the last participant. That's the youngest son of Lorena. And he even wrote it. He was like, this is my English map. So he decided just to talk about English. And of course, you know, as a researcher, remember, you're not going to influence on the decision, right, of your participants. So perfect, that's English. And again, he walked me through, kind of like explain what he was drawing and why. So yeah, he drew like school, but also he drew the United States, you know, like symbolically, and then London, and then New York City, very separate, which is a place where he just visited, and he loved New York, and he also loved London. So it was really interesting how he envisioned, right, the places where he speaks English. And also when you don't find something, when you don't see, for example, in this case, Spanish, that's also very meaningful. So the lack of information is an information, right? Okay. So now let me take you through the walking ethnography. So this is another article by the same person, by Kim Powell, but this time it's 2017. And that was really fascinating. So she says that walking is an important method of sensory. So we use all the senses, because remember, when you walk, you will smell, you will see, right? You will hear things. So it's multi-sensory method. And of course, it's intercultural, because it's very probable that the place in which you are going to walk, it's not the place in which you were raised, for example. So you're going to, or maybe you're going to walk with someone who was not raised in the city. So you will be facing also this challenge of interculturality while walking in the city. Kim Powell, she came with this method. Sometimes it's called walking ethnography, but also it's called story walks. So as you can see, it's about telling stories when you are walking. So this is a great ethnographic method. For example, for answering this question that we had before, how can I build those relations, right, with my participants? I think that this is really perfect. When you walk with your participants, you just ask them to tell the story of the places where you are walking with them. So the places are going to be the prompts, right, for those people to talk about those places, to tell their stories. So even if you have been in those places, remember that it's not about this time your experience with those places. It's about the experience of your participant with whom you are walking. So you will get to know the place, maybe it's a town, a city, through the eyes, through the ears, right, through the senses of this participant. So Kim, she actually she lived for some time in San Jose, California, and she went to a neighborhood called Japantown, where they had, so again, there's lots of history, right? As in El Chorrillo, we need to know which places we are really visiting. So she was walking with American Chinese people, but what is important is some of them, they still remembered the Second World War, and they had camps, like intern camps, in which those American Japanese people were sent during or they were forced to move from their houses to those camps. And they have been, unfortunately, considered the enemies of the US. So that was a very tragic history. And Japantown has this history. So she wanted to learn those stories from those people by walking through the city that suffered during the Second World War. For example, this is a city, you know, of the San Jose, it's taken from internet, but the one down here, it's a photo, this one, that actually Kim took when she was walking with her participant. So you can see it's not the typical touristic photo, it's just the photo that she took, and she was actually recording it. This time she was not taking photos, she was recording it. And what is also important is that when you walk with the person, you are not having the camera on the people, but on the other side. So you are also protecting, remember, the identity of your participant. So you are actually looking at everything except yourself and your participant. So it's the other side of the camera that you are using. And let me show you how I used it, because I fell in love with this method. And I used it with the same person that drew the map, Lorena. So I asked her to take me to places in which she speaks different languages. Okay, so she had to like walk with me and just tell her stories of her interactions, communication with people in different languages, because she's multilingual. So she chose the places, and she chose 3 places. So I had no kind of influence on that. She said that she would like to start by going to Plaza Mexican. Then she wanted to go to the Sours Harvest Cafe. And then she wanted to go to an Italian bakery. Okay, so those are the places she chose. So we drew, because it was also far away from, so I picked her up and we drew to Plaza Mexican. So I used, I took just the photo of, my GPS. And then when I recorded her story, when we were there, so we were not walking yet, we just entered the restaurant and she was telling me the story about it. So I started to record scenes like we parked. So let me just play it.
Y acá me gusta venir como para un lunch pequeño, o sea, a mis hijos realmente no les gusta venir a comer aquí. Ellos prefieren comida japonesa, pizza o hamburguesas. Entonces acá vengo más con amigas latinas.
Okay, so you get the sense. So I was trying to, of course you keep like having a conversation, but I was trying not to interrupt much, right? Just let it go so that she could tell her story. And then we went to Sours Cafe. And then from, so then we entered, we had tea, and it was really interesting because she was telling me about like all the menu, what she would order when she's with her international friends, as she called them. When she comes alone, what she would order, at which table she would sit. So all this information that she was giving to me. And then we walked. So the last part, when we walked to the bakery, the Italian bakery. So that was the distance. So again, I was recording that.
Música o podcast o lo que sea.
Algo. Yo sé, y de verdad que
yo no puedo ser, mi hija es también así, Andresito, no sé. Yo te sigo, no, por dónde es. Tengo los audífonos, bicicleta o caminando. Sí, Mati.
So as you can see, I'm not recording her, I'm recording the walk, what she's showing me. And on the way, she told me, like stories like, oh, by the way, this is a place, where my son comes with his ex-girlfriend. And so all those stories that she was telling me were, that was really fascinating. So this is how I used the walking story in my case, because I was particularly interested in the lived experiences, right, of my participants. And I wanted them to show me where they have their language practices and with whom and what kind of language practices they have. So instead of interviewing them about this, of course, I also interviewed them. So I did different things, but I thought that this walking was really very revealing for understanding the experiences of those people and the cultural kind of embeddedness in this particular place in Pennsylvania. Okay, questions for walking ethnography? You had many questions before. I still remember them. So if I can still refer to them in the remaining part, I will. So let me move on and continue with the interviewing. So as I've been telling you before, I really like combining different ethnographic methods so that I can have triangulation. But this time, again, because of the Zoom kind of limitations, I am not going to walk, and also the mapping is a little bit more complicated. I could do it. I could ask people to draw things, of course, for me. But what I decided to do is interviewing people, but interviewing people from really very different perspectives so that I can have, I can illuminate kind of my research questions from different angles. So instead of like maybe using more ethnographic methods, I'm using mainly this one, which is interviewing, but I incremented the kind of participants and the number of participants, so that we call it in ethnographic methods crystallization. So it's like a crystal that, like, when you look at it, right, it shines from all different angles differently, like different colors. So with the crystallization, you illuminate your research questions from different angles. So for example, Javi, you are one of my angles, right? To illuminate my research questions. So I'm not only talking to the participants in my free sites, right? But also to other people that I think can really help me understand the phenomenon I am interested in. So here I have just very, very basic things, because I know that with Javier, you're going to talk much more, because interviewing is one of the main ethnographic methods. So here I just, I think that I just kind of have like those, you know, the most important like key things about interviewing. So the first thing is, remember that when you are interviewing, you're asking about things you cannot see. Or you explore alternatives of what you do see, but you want to learn about alternatives of what you see, okay? Or you ask about things you cannot see. So in other words, for example, this is of course a very simple example, but I'm not going to ask, you know, Javier, so what is the population of Quito? I can find it out, okay? I'm not going to ask and occupy my interview with such factual question. The other important thing is to decide what kind of interviewing you will have, and that basically 3 types. So it's very structured one, in which like journalists, right, you just ask question by question. So you have your list of questions already prepared. Very often you already pass these questions to the interviewee, so that this person knows what questions are coming. However, I like, and actually many ethnographers like, the semi-structured interviews. So that means that you do have an idea, you have what we call a protocol, but this protocol is very flexible, because an interviewee may answer question number 5, actually in question number 2. So I'm not going to repeat the same question, because this person already answered it. Or maybe by answering question number 2, actually this person made a great connection to question number 6. So I'm going to move it around. So you have to, of course, listen carefully to your interviewee, so that this protocol is alive. It's evolving with the conversation. And the last one, the last type, is conversational. So for example, the interview, let's say that I had when I was walking, I had no questions in my mind. Like I was like really listening more than interviewing to Lorena, right? But occasionally I would, you know, take advantage of something that she said, and I might ask for, you know, for more or for an example, etc. So it's completely conversational. So those are the main types. Now, how can I structure those questions? So first of all, when we do ethnographic interviews, we start with a grand tour question. It might be just one question about the whole experience of the person. You can say, okay, tell me about like your typical day. This kind of questions, or walk me through your daily practices as anthropologist in Politécnica Nacional. What does an anthropologist do in Politécnica Nacional? Okay, so it's a very open question that will allow to build relationship, to get to know each other. So it's like a very open question, and you will see also where your interview is taking you. Then you will definitely ask questions called experience. So you will start actually the question, so what is your experience doing this and that? Also, we have questions called opinion questions. So what is your opinion about this and that? Very typical questions. Feeling questions. So how do you feel about this new policy, right, that has been incremented? How do you feel about curfew during pandemic, right? So you can hear some emotions, right? So your interviewer may say, oh, I'm really angry at this, or that makes me super happy, etc., etc. Another type of questions would be more related to like the sensory questions. So what do you see? What did you hear, right? What do you hear about this? So more like things that the person can sense, perceive. So questions about perception. And the final question, which I think that it's very, very useful. We call it probing question. So probing question is a question in which you ask for clarifications, for examples. You paraphrase the questions to make sure that you understood, and you ask for more elaboration. So those are very useful questions, especially if your interviewee is kind of parco and is not giving you very long answers, right? So those are like the, so I'm using Glesna. Glesna is a very good course book that we are using in our university. I think it's like a Bible for ethnographers. She's a great ethnographer. So I really enjoyed her book, and now sharing what I learned from her book. Just very briefly, some common mistakes. So things that we should reconsider when we are doing interviews. So when we are constructing questions, try to avoid questions that would be yes/no questions. So questions like, no, do you like your city, Quito? That's yes. Another type of questions that should be reconsidered is closed questions. So it seems that you are giving an open question, but really you already have chosen like a part of what you want to hear about, and you are only giving this option to your participant, to your interview. So I don't know, for example, if you are going to ask about challenges of something, but you only ask about challenges and, and the bad things. So you are already closing somehow this interviewee, instead of, for example, asking about the whole experience, successes, plans, also maybe failures, right? You're only maybe focusing on failures. So it's still, this person can tell you about different failures. So it looks like it's open, but it's really closed. Okay. And then the kind of dangerous questions for ethnographers is a leading question. So you already have like in your mind and the answer. So you're asking a question to hear the answer you already have in your head. Okay, and this is like the mantra. this is one of the most important things to remember when we are actually not only for interviews, for any kind of ethnographic data. The data you get are only as good as the questions you ask, right? So that's why it's really important to have good ethnographic methods, to have rich and good data. And in terms of interviews, it's really important to have good questions. Okay, I will skip this. And the last part, which is autoethnography. But before that, do you have any questions for the interviewing part? Vladimir?
Yes, thank you, Magdalena. About the interviewing, how many questions do you consider can be or can make the studio like representative, or it depends on the phenomenon again, or how can you measure that? Because I think I don't know how you measure the number of interviews, when it's good, it's bad, it's representative. I don't know. I would like to know that.
That's a very good question. So sometimes, Vladimir, actually, when you have, so certain people really, they will give you very rich, very elaborated answers. So sometimes, you know, you have prepared in your flexible, semi-structured protocol, right? You might have prepared, I don't know, let's say 10 questions, okay? Just kind of like topics that you wanna ask about. But you've been talking to this person for, you know, like 90 minutes, and this person actually elaborated very, very, very richly on 2 questions. So now, are you going to cut this person? Like, I'm sorry, I have more questions. Or you are going to say, this is really interesting what this person, I haven't even thought about it when I was thinking about my questions, right? So also you have to actually hear what the person is saying, right? Because when the person is really telling an interesting story, and you haven't even thought about, or you didn't really know how to ask a question about this kind of experience without being leading, right, to this answer. So you just, and you just listen, right? So sometimes that's why it's a semi-structure. So you have to be flexible, and then you can ask the person to meet again. So yes, you don't need to meet necessarily one time. It depends on the participant, how kind of key the participant is to your research. With some participants, you may want to meet more than once. You know, but oftentimes we somehow recognize the time that the people spend with us. We, at least in my university, we tend to offer like gift cards to the participants, but we have to always remember that it's a generosity on the part of our participants, that instead of doing whatever, they decide to contribute to our study. So we also have to be aware of that and very thankful for the time. So at the same time, you are not going to waste the time, right, on not thinking about the questions. So like you have to investigate a little bit the person, so you already know a little bit about the person, so that you can go, you know, much more in depth with this person, because you learned about this person. Maybe you read things that this person wrote, right? So you know something, so you do your homework, right, as a researcher before really kind of using the time of this person. But then also it's important to be at the same time flexible, because this person may be telling you really super interesting story and you are fixed with your kind of protocol and you're like, oh, okay, let's move on, and you just cut it. And I've seen it very often, like great stories happening and, you know, interviewers just rushing like, okay, let's go to the next question. And it's like, it hurts because that was so revealing. That was such a great information. And the interviewer maybe was not listening carefully and was like, okay, let's move on. And you lost it. And like you lost this momentum, and probably it will be difficult to have this story maybe repeated again. So it's not, so there is no actually a number, Vladimir, like of hours that you should spend on collecting interviews. So nobody would tell you, okay, you need to have 10 hours to publish a study. So there are not number. It's really about the depth, right, and the richness, and then how you are going to triangulate your data with maybe other ethnographic methods like observations, document analysis, realia, etc. So it's not really about the number of hours, but definitely you should feel that your research questions have been illuminated, right? You've received lots of information, great data that you can analyze and answer your research questions. So you have enough. Sometimes we have too much. So then, you know, instead of a paper, you publish the whole book because you have so much data.
And about the people, how do you know how many people you should interview, for example, for make the study representative or to discover something interesting about it? How do you manage the quantity of the people?
Yeah, so it's in this case, it's very different from quantitative methods because you could have one participant and you can have a groundbreaking study.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about the richness.
Pablo, por favor.
Gracias. Cuando se utilizan las entrevistas, obviamente, concuerdo contigo que los datos son tan buenos como las preguntas que se realizan. Pero digamos, en algún punto, dependiendo del tema, se llega a hacer un análisis del discurso, si queremos llamarlo así, de lo que opinan las personas, o es algo de cajón que va con las respuestas en cualquier tipo de entrevistas. ¿Depende del tema o siempre tiene que hacerse?
Te estás preguntando, no estoy segura, estás preguntando sobre los métodos de análisis después de esta data.
Así es.
Okay. Perfecto. Sí, hay diferentes métodos, ¿sí? Porque una cosa es lo que se llama data collection methods y otra es lo que se llama data analysis methods, ¿verdad? Aquí en esta presentación nada más me estoy fijando en data collection methods, no en análisis. Entonces sí va a depender. Depende de qué es lo que quiero entender. Por ejemplo, si yo quiero entender la interacción, ¿sí?, entre las personas, porque hice observaciones, por ejemplo, en un aula y hice videos, ¿sí?, de horas de clase y de verdad me quiero enfocar en la interacción. Yo utilizaría interactional analysis. Pero, por ejemplo, si yo tengo mis entrevistas, yo puedo más bien utilizar, porque quiero entender como que los temas que yo estoy viendo, que se están dando entre diferentes personas que estoy entrevistando, y puedo utilizar otro método que se llama thematic analysis. Entonces va a depender de verdad de qué es lo que quiero entender, en qué me estoy enfocando. Pero sí, hay obviamente algunos métodos que son muy como que habitualmente usados en estudios etnográficos. Creo que estos dos que acabo de mencionar, que es interactional analysis y thematic analysis, son probablemente unos muy típicos, pero también hay otros como conversational analysis, que también es un método muy importante para los lingüistas, por ejemplo, que quieren ver los segundos de diferencia entre, mientras una frase termina, otra empieza, de la interacción de las personas. O lo ven muy al nivel, por ejemplo, lingüístico. Entonces sí, hay diferentes maneras de analizar data.
Gracias.
Tamara, por favor.
Thank you, Magdalena. This question probably not directly related to interviewing as a method, but how do you think the pandemic and the new reality will change or impact ethnographic research?
That's a good question, Tamara. You know, we can still find ways when we are not physically, like, you know, we figure out how to teach, right? How to make those meetings. I have not been using Zoom, I don't know, 3 years ago, probably, right? But now this is my everyday life. So we humans, we figure out things, how to still do our job, right? How to teach. So teachers had to reinvent themselves. So researchers, we will somehow also need to reinvent how we do research when we maybe cannot travel, maybe it's dangerous, maybe there's pandemic, right? So how can we still use those ethnographic methods that imply that we are with the people, getting to know their social relations, and kind of sensing the place, right? Being there. With that, you know, with some basic strategies, of course, we can video recording things, right? We can participate in meetings. We can also, and I've seen it, my colleagues, they've started to do it. They are doing observations in Zoom classes. So, you know, like they are just sitting there and observing interactions, you know, being just observers in a Zoom. But again, they tend to know the professor so that it's not, you know, they are not intruders in this class. So there are things that are already happening. I know that people are recording things and sending back to the researcher. So for example, with pandemic, as for the walking, you could ask, instead of, you know, walking with somebody, you can kind of ask the person, you know, to have the camera, even the pro, and just walk and record what this person is kind of, you know, doing, where this person is walking, and then send you back. So of course you need to know this person to have this kind of confidence, right? To ask for this, to ask the participant to, like, okay, you are in charge of collecting the data for me, right? But you can ask people to do it. Actually, collecting this kind of data was happening actually before even the pandemic. So I know that some researchers, they thought that it was much more productive not to be with the participant, because the participant might have felt intimidated by the presence of the researcher, but we're just asking the person, can you, I'm not going to your house, can you record your dinner time with your family? Okay, so of course the family would give the consent that they agree to be recorded, and then this participant was recorded, his or her own family having, you know, a dinner conversation, and then sending it to the researcher. So actually those methods, you know, were used before. So yeah, I think, Tamara, you know, we have to be creative and reinvent ethnographic methods as much as we can. Ask participants. Maybe I've been talking about it with English teachers in Cuenca. So they thought that this is really good during pandemic, because yes, kids don't go to school, but they still go out. So they were saying, okay, I can ask my student to go out and like record where they are going and talk about it in English and then send it to me, right? So I will have like this, you know, the oral production of English. So, you know, they've been so really creative and trying to adapt those methods as much as they can. So this is still very open. And yeah, and if you come up with, you know, with creative solutions, please contribute to the field.
Thank you so much, Magdalena.
Okay, so let's continue. This is the last part. I know that we don't have much time. So this is, I decided to talk about autoethnography, mainly because this is one, again, this is one of the methods that I truly like because I consider myself a self-reflective person, and I like to think about who I am, where I'm situated, and not who I am, you know, in very basic terms, but like in all the different aspects of my identity and my consciousness. So I started to use this method, and that was actually my first publication, was using autoethnography. So autoethnography is the kind of getting to know, but in this case, my own social relations in different places. So I'm reflecting on my own cultural self, basically, right? And so I use, so that different ways of doing autoethnography, the one that I'm doing, since this is just, you know, a very brief introduction, I use analytical autoethnography. And I really like analytical autoethnography, and that comes from Pearson, 2006. So this kind of autoethnography, so remember that you are analyzing your cultural self in relation to others, right? But as the name says, you very deliberately, you analyze your experience, right? So it's not, you know, about the emotions, and I'm going to talk about my experience because I don't know, I fell in love and like I just want to share, or maybe I don't know, I want to talk about some generous moment or kind moment in my life. It's not really that much about emotions in this case. It's more about analyzing my my actions, my words, my history, who I am in terms of my cultural embeddedness in a certain place with certain people. So I do this analysis, and not me, but in analytical autoethnography, you do it explicitly. So there is, you know, in your writing, you explicitly analyze yourself, and you use theory, right? So you sustain, it's not your, you know, it's not like a diary. That would be a different method when you are just writing notes or memos. This is not really a memo. This is more using a theory to understand things you did, things you said, how you reacted, how you acted upon certain things. So according to Anderson, there are like 5, let's say, key premises when you're using this kind of tool to, you know, use yourself as a, right, as a way to understand a phenomenon, right? I will give you an example in a moment. So number 1, you need to be a complete member researcher. So for example, in the piece that I wrote, I analyzed transnational teachers, right? So I am a transnational teacher, so I have a full membership. So I'm writing about transnational teachers using myself as an example. So according to Anderson, and I do agree with that, you have to be a full membership of member of the phenomenon. Then you use analytic reflexivity. So it's not only reflexivity, it's analytical. Then you, yes, of course, you have a narration. So you talk about yourself as a researcher, but also in your stories, in this autoethnography, you interact with other people, right? It's not only writing about yourself, but about also, for example, myself, interacting with other people, right? So I may cite those moments, I can recall those events when I was interacting with somebody. And that conversation made me think, made me reflect on transnational teachers, for example. And number 5, as I said before, it's important to use the theory to understand your analysis, right? So it's like I myself, I consider myself a data. So I'm a walking data, right? So I use theory on myself. Let me show you an example. So this is a piece that I wrote actually with 2 other people. One of them is my colleague, and the other one, Dr. Haneda, she's my advisor at Penn State. And all of us, we are transnational teachers. So for example, Sarah Han, she's Korean. Mari Haneda, she's Japanese Canadian. And me, Magdalena Madany, I'm Polish Ecuadorian, and now also I have US residence. So I was having my my reflection. So on the left side, this is a piece from this autoethnography. So I'm reflecting on what happened, what I did, what I experienced. And I thought that that's important to understand who I am as a teacher, as a transnational teacher. So here I'm saying, as a teacher trainer in a nationwide training program for English teachers launched by the Ecuadorian Ministry of Education, I heard numerous personal stories of teachers who participated in the assessment process, many of whom had never previously seen a TOEFL test and did not possess basic computer skills. So here, just to give you the context, I'm talking about the time around 2006 when English teachers, they had to take a nationwide TOEFL test, which is a proficiency test in English, and they were evaluated, the English skills were evaluated with this test. After this test was concluded, the results were published, and the Ministry of Education organized a training for those teachers because this test revealed that the level of English was low. So the ministry launched this big training, and I was part of this training. I was training those teachers, right? So I will keep reading just this part. I recall elder teachers coming to my office with brand new computers saying, "My daughter bought me this laptop. Can you teach me how to turn it on?" These teachers had little or no opportunity to practice and were understandably anxious because results were publicized by Rafael Correa, the president of Ecuador, who had announced the end of social deceit and was committed to replacing English teachers who are not proficient. So that's like the part, right, in which I'm reflecting on my experience, my cultural experience with those teachers as a trainer. And I'm using immediately, after this piece, I'm using a theory to understand those teachers and me as a trainer, as a transnational trainer. So, for example, I used the theory of global Englishes. So Englishes that are spoken differently in different parts of the world. So I used Suresh Kanagaraja, and also I used the theory from Kumara Vadivelu called global cultural consciousness. So through those theoretical lenses, I analyzed my cultural self. So my reflections combined with my reading on these topics. So also so it's important, like you use yourself, your reflections, your experience, but you combine it with what you know, what you read, right, as a researcher. So then you see the problems. In this case, for example, I saw the problems of uncritically, right, adopting certain systems of evaluations, right? So even though I participated in this training and somehow we could say I agreed with the system after the reflection and using those theories, I actually problematized this kind of assessment, right? Using the theory that I used. Okay, so this is just a little example. Of course, I will, if you wish to read it, I would be honored. So let me show you them. So there's one thing I haven't talked about, which is the collaborative autoethnography, because as you could see, there were 3 of us. So there's also a little bit of theory about collaborative autoethnography, but I was not that relevant at this moment, and I would rather have more time to have an activity with you than talking about this. But the other references I think you can find very useful. So the analytic autoethnography, Glesner, becoming qualitative researchers, which I told you it's like the Bible. Then this is my my chapter in a TESL edition, and then the 2 articles by Kim Powell that I used. What time is it? Do we have like 15 minutes more, Javier?
Sí, tenemos tiempo, no te preocupes, que necesites.
Ok, muy bien. ¿Tenemos alguna pregunta antes de que, porque me gustaría hacer un ejercicio con ustedes? Antes de que hagamos el ejercicio, ¿hay alguna pregunta? Hasta luego, Andrés. Ok, entonces, en este caso, si te parece, Javi, dejemos de grabar porque las personas van a trabajar ahorita en grupos, entonces no va a haber mucha grabación en realidad. Muy bien, entonces déjenme ver, aquí estoy viendo el chat.
Magda, si te parece, bueno, antes de dejar de grabar también me gustaría dejar constancia pues del profundo agradecimiento por parte de nosotros y creo que de todos, ¿no? Si hablo en nombre de todos, por tus aportes que han sido muy enriquecedores respecto al potencial que tienen los métodos cualitativos y me imagino que los chicos están pensando ya cómo adaptarlos y qué se podría hacer con todo esto. Así que les pediría por favor un aplauso a nuestra expositora. Muchísimas gracias.
Ay, muchas gracias.
Gracias.